Wherever there are shadows, there are people ready to kick at the darkness until it bleeds daylight. This is Bleeding Daylight with your host, Rodney Olson.
Welcome to Bleeding Daylight. Thanks for listening. There are hundreds more inspirational episodes waiting for you at bleedingdaylight.net. Please find and follow Bleeding Daylight on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok and YouTube. Is the story we live in our early years still controlling our life today? Are unrecognised traumas, disappointments and dysfunctions still writing the script for the patterns we're playing out in our daily lives? Is it possible to break free from the past and move towards freedom and flourishing? Today's guest wants to help you begin walking towards healing. Today I'm talking with someone who's spent years learning that our life patterns aren't random. They're often survival strategies we picked up long before we had words for what was happening to us. Konson built a career as a corporate attorney in South Africa before stepping away from law to raise 4 kids and pour herself into ministry and community. Underneath it all, she was quietly struggling until she discovered that behaviour is downstream from story. That discovery led her into years of story work, trauma-informed training and honest community, and eventually into creating her own journal titled Untangling Your Story to help others begin untangling their stories too. Michelle, welcome to Bleeding Daylight.
So glad to be here with you.
I wonder if the first part of untangling our stories is realising that we actually have a story. While some people experience obvious trauma, I'm guessing a lot of people grow up with unhealthy patterns, but if that's all they know, it would just seem normal. So was that the case for you? Did you have to re-examine your life to realise that there were things that had been left unidentified?
Yeah, I think we all are very aware of little t trauma and big T trauma. And I think sometimes we think that the people that have big T trauma, the loss of a parent or parents getting divorced or being in an accident or some kind of abuse, we think those are the people that had trauma. And we think that everyone else was just fine. We all think that our own circumstances are normal to a degree. And so I think that's very accurate that unless we've had something really big happen to us that other people would label as trauma, that we often think our lives were totally normal, nothing happened to us that needs attention or needs us to look back on. Therefore, however we're acting now or anything that could have come out of that was really not true.
Take me back to that time when life looked very successful for you on the outside. Things were going well, you were ministering to other people, and yet there was something going on underneath. When did that start to really grab hold of you and make you say, this shouldn't be like this and I need to find an answer?
I, as you mentioned, was in corporate law, felt like I had kind of cracked the career box, could kind of check that, and then had a marriage to a really great guy that I loved. People had really admired our relationship, our connection. We moved to the US from South Africa, where I grew up, for him to go to business school, and he had a great career. We ultimately had 4 children. And so from the outside, everything looked great. Everyone was like, well, you have everything, right? You have everything that anyone else would ever want. And yet somehow I was really, really struggling. And I think I was struggling because I was using the survival strategies that I had as a child. And one of the big ones was control. And I was trying desperately to control all the circumstances in my life. And while that worked for me as a child, that worked when I tried to put the little dolls in the pram or the stroller at my preschool and hid it in the corner so it would be there for me at recess again. That didn't quite work so well when I had 4 kids who started getting older and started having emotions that I couldn't control. That felt so overwhelming to me. And so I think once my kids started getting older and I couldn't control them or my circumstances any longer, I really started unraveling and started realizing I'm falling apart on the insides. Something needs to change because otherwise we're not headed in a good way.
As you look back over your life, could you see the genesis of that control issue? Did you see this is where it stems back to?
Yeah, so I had a father who I dearly loved, who's now passed away, but who really had a lot of trauma in his life. His dad passed away when he was 6. He lost his first wife tragically when she was really young. And so I think he had a lot of trauma that he never dealt with, and that came out to the rest of us. And it came out in the form of gaslighting us, really trying to control everyone else in the family. And I would have said he was just strict and he just liked things the way they were. But the more I started untangling that story, the more I realized that I was really impacted by his control and by his grief that he never worked through, and the way he gaslit myself, my mom, my grandparents, my brother. We were all kind of part of a system that was really enabling him. And I was really able to start seeing that, okay, there are reasons why I needed to create some survival strategies here. There were reasons why this felt so chaotic as a child, even though, again, nothing big was happening necessarily in terms of trauma language. Little things were happening every day. And it really helped me to realize that people liken big T trauma to a broken bone. Clearly that needs care. But little T trauma is like a stone in your shoe. And if you have a stone in your shoe for decades, that is going to change the way you walk. Looking back, I was able to see why I had started needing some survival strategies, why I started needing to put those control mechanisms into place, and needed to then start digging into what those circumstances were and how I could start healing in those places.
What were the first steps for you towards healing? When did you start to say, this is the kind of help that I need, and how were you directed to that?
So I initially sought out some Christian counseling. I felt like I was at my wit's end, really needed help. So started seeing some Christian counselors, really thought I needed help with now, right? I was like, why am I yelling at my kids? Why do I feel depressed? Why do I really feel like I can't carry on every day? Those were the things I wanted help with. I'm like, help me with those. And she very wisely started looking back, saying, you had survival strategies that you built as a child when life felt overwhelming. Our bodies do something really brilliant when we're children, and actually even when we're adults, when we experience trauma, is they fragment that trauma when we don't have the language or the tools to deal with it. If you think about a puzzle being fragmented into all its pieces, we kind of have to fragment when we can't control and we can't understand and we can't deal with as children. And so I had all these fragments that I then needed to start finding. So my counselor started leading me to start remembering, start talking about what life was like at home, what things felt like at home. How did that feel familiar to what was happening now? And piece by piece, I started bringing some of those fragments together to where I could start making sense of what had happened to me and why I was struggling now. The whole puzzle will never really fully be put together on this side of heaven. And I think we will get that view when we are with the Lord. I think we get really good glimpses of parts of that story, and we keep adding to them, and we keep bringing more fragments and memories and pieces. Really, by going back, I was able to start putting some pieces together where I was able to say, you know what, that makes so much sense now.
How do we know how far to go back and how much digging we need to do? Because we can dig endlessly, and I would imagine that it gets to a point where it's just no longer helpful. How do we know we need to uncover these patterns, but at the same time, let's not uncover everything that is not helpful for us?
Correct. Yeah, I didn't think it's wise to just uncover everything for the sake of uncovering it. And, our bodies do protect us from things that we're not ready to deal with when we don't have the right community, the right people, the safe people for us to process it with. Our bodies are very protective over those parts that are still too hard for us to really work through well. That's one of the things I started uncovering on my journey is, how do I give people tools to start going back? And so that's really what was the start of me creating the Untangling Your Story journal. Parts of the journal are a timeline. You just start with a general timeline, 0 to 18, and you just mark the things that you do remember. You mark really the milestones, and you mark the good and the bad that you remember. And by doing that, the more you start remembering, your body brilliantly starts pulling up other pieces that are linked and tied to them. And so you really can trust that your body and your brain are going to lead you in this process. And so you're not just going digging for the sake of digging. You are actually finding pieces that are accessible to you, and then you're starting to think about another piece and another piece. And I found that once you start doing that, you could be cleaning the house, doing laundry, and you'll remember another piece, and you'll be like, I haven't thought about that in 30 years. I had totally forgotten that. And now all of a sudden I'm remembering that. And you have another piece that you can then put together with what's starting to come together. And so I think it really starts with what we actually do already remember. And then our brains and our bodies really are very helpful in helping us remember more. And that's also, again, where safe community comes into play. I have been part of a group therapy group for the past 5 years. It really has been life-changing for me. I always think of the words of Dr. Kurt Thompson, who's a really very wise voice in this space, and he tells us that our brains can literally rewire when we tell our stories in the presence of empathetic listeners. And I've really seen that happen in this group, where every week we come together and we share a lot of what we're struggling with today. And that's another way that we can kind of enter in and start looking back and finding pieces. And there is a part of the journal too that looks at what I call the knots, right? The places where we find ourselves stuck today. And we look at, why does this feel familiar? And do I remember feeling like this before? Does any of this remind me of something that's happened before? But in those groups, other people who have heard me share parts of my story and parts of my struggles for the last 5 years are able to say, that reminds me of something that you mentioned before when you told me about the situation that happened. And I'll be like, oh my goodness, I didn't think about that. I haven't put those pieces together. Again, we need community. We need other people who can mirror back to us what they see, because often we're blinded to those things that we've lived in, right? And you think about a fish swimming in a fish tank, right? It only knows that dirty water that it's swimming in, and it can't necessarily see everything that it needs to see. I would say we start with what we know. We look at what we're stuck in right now, and we need community.
I'm sure there are a couple of different ways that people can handle this information that comes from discovering that story. One is to say, well, that explains why I am like I am, so you need to take me like that. That's just how I'm now wired. Or, as you're doing, to say, this explains my behavior now, but now I can move toward some healing. How much more freeing is it to take it down that road?
Well, I once had a counselor tell me that I was already doing the hard, right? Living my life daily with these survival strategies, trying to keep things together, trying to manage with ways that are way outdated to where I'm living now. That's already hard, right? And I think most of us can attest to that we find a lot of ways that we handle our lives, so that we live our lives very difficult. So he said, I can either continue to do that hard, or I can take on the new hard, right? I can start looking back. I can start remembering. I can start processing grief that I needed to process when the trauma happened, but there was no room for it to happen. And so I get to do that now. And yes, that is hard, but I can do this new hard, and I can then find a sense of freedom from those survival strategies, from feeling stuck, from looping the same behaviors over and over again, behaviors that really don't serve me well now and don't really get me to where I want to go. You're right, we do have a choice. We can say, I'm just going to stay where I am. But I think many of us, deep down and not so deep down, can say, that's not really what I want to do. I already know, and I can tell that that's not really going to be best for me. That's not going to be life-giving. And so we get to do a different hard. They're both hard. But the new hard gets us to a place where we start actually uncovering them, untangling them, and start to live a much freer, more connected life.
I know that when it came to writing your journal, Untangling Your Story, you did have this thought of, does the world really need another journal? Does the world need more resources? What was it that made you decide, this is something that I need to do, and I think it's going to fill a gap that hasn't been filled to this point?
Yeah, so once I started doing my own story work, I really spoke to more and more women who I realized were in the same spot as I was. And I was very convicted of the fact that I wanted other people not to have to struggle in the same ways that I did, not to have to come to a point of almost hitting a breakdown before they then started looking back at their story. So I wanted to give other people an opportunity to start this work way earlier. So I started speaking to women's groups and to moms groups started working on a book. That's really how I started this whole process. I was like, oh, I'll just write a book, and found out, oh, you need a platform for agents to look at you. And so created the website, and they were like, well, you need to speak to get more followers. So I started speaking, and looking back, I just see how God planned each step by step for me to take. I think if He'd showed me the whole picture, I may not have taken all the steps I needed to. But as I was speaking to women and sharing the journey that I had been on, the question I always got was, this sounds great. How do I start? This journal is not the answer. It is a tool. There is no one way to do this. There's no one way to untangle your story, no one way to really go back into your past and to deal with what you need to deal with. I think you need multiple tools, multiple people and communities coming alongside you. But there really wasn't a story work journal out there. I was like, okay, I can live with that and there not be a story work journal, or I can create one. As God works, and I just so love this, I always, even as a little girl, loved stationery. It was like my favorite thing ever. We had a stationery store up the road from us, and it was my favorite thing ever as a child to come home from school and to go look at that stationery store every day, because they would get new stock of new notepads and writing paper and pens. And how kind of God to allow me to then create something that I've always loved. The journal that I actually got to pour a lot of what He's done in my life into. So I created the journal. It was a big step because I've never created a journal before. How do you create a journal? I don't know. But I realized people needed a tool to help. I also wanted to bridge the gap between formal counseling and what happens before that. Because I know a lot of us go to counseling and often we're like, well, I don't really know what the issues are. So let's talk and figure it out. And that's great. Many of us need that in certain areas where we really are stuck. But sometimes when we start doing a little bit of the work by ourselves, we then can go into a counselor's office and say, hey, I've already done a little bit of work on my own, and I've realized that I'm stuck in these places, and I would love for us to work on this. And so I think it allows us to use our time, which we know with counselors is expensive and it's precious, more effectively. Yeah, so I thought that it was really great to create this tool. Wasn't sure I could do it. And, with community beside me, if I could tell you the stories of what I needed and the community I needed to actually even create this journal, just found that this was a great tool to provide for people. And again, there's also a lot of research coming out more and more about how actually writing something physically with a pen on paper, especially in our digital age, actually helps us to process. So it helps us to take portions of our memory and our lived experience that lives in our amygdala, and it brings it to our prefrontal cortex, literally by the process of writing with a pen on paper. And so that was another reason I felt like in this very digital world that I wanted to bring some of the neuroscience in, and wanted to really provide a tool that was very helpful.
You mentioned earlier something that's been really helpful for you is that group therapy. I can imagine people listening right now thinking that sounds scary, to start to unload the things that I've been through and am going through in front of a group of other people. So is your journal a good starter for people like that who say, I'm not ready to go to that step, but I need to start somewhere?
Yeah, totally. I mean, the journal is something that you get to sit with, and you can do that alone, very much so you can do that alone. I've had multiple people buy the journals for a group of friends, for people who are already in a safe community and who are ready to commit and say, we want to work through some hard stuff together. And so we're going to take these journals and we're going to work through this together. We're going to set a time every week and do that. I do want to reiterate, though, you cannot deal with your trauma on your own forever. Part of why something is traumatic when we go through it is that we go through it alone. You can have two people go through a very traumatic experience, and one can have a great support system, and they will not nearly be as traumatized or have nearly as many woundings or scars going forward as somebody else who had to deal with it alone. When we go back and we deal with our childhood trauma that has really shaped and formed us, we have to have community that walks alongside us and helps us to process that. Again, empathetic listeners who are able to mirror back to us. So we can see people's faces. We can see people actually crying for something that happened to us, and we can see their grief, and it can maybe help us to start accessing grief. And we can see their joy when we finally come upon something that they have seen for a long time that we haven't been able to see. And all of a sudden we're like, oh my goodness, I see this, and see the joy on their faces and know that we've really come on something big. Like that changes us. That changes our brains. It changes our neural networks and our connections in our brains so that we can then start having new neural connections, new behaviors, become more of the new people that we want to become. Yes, the journal is a great way for you to start doing it on your own, but working through your story ultimately in some shape or form involves some form of community, as scary as that is.
A common thread that I find with people who have suffered various kinds of trauma or are seeking healing in one way or another, a common thread I find is that those people find greater healing or faster healing when they actually start to help others along their journey. They may not be at their final point and everything's wrapped up with a neat bow, but along the journey, they're actually helping others. Have you found that as you've reached out to other people, as you've provided them some of the keys towards healing, that has helped in your own healing?
Absolutely. 100%. It's part of community, right? It's part of the process that I get to do this with other people. I get to share part of my story, and I have other people come up to me and say, well, oh, I had something similar happen to me, or, oh, I've worked through this element of something that you walked through that was very similar, and this is what I found. And I'll be like, oh my goodness, I'd never even seen it from that angle. Thank you so much. That's so helpful for me. So yes, it has been enormously helpful for me to share. We will never get to the point again on the side of heaven where we get to tie that neat bow, I don't believe, because we are sinful human beings living in a fallen world. And I don't think on the side of heaven that we will get to the point where that bow gets tied. So if we're waiting for that to start sharing or to start helping others, we're never going to get there. I think the enemy would love for us to stay in that place where we don't share, because by sharing, I think we also give other people courage. It's a courageous thing for us to share too, right? We just said it's vulnerable. It's not fun to share some of your deepest hurts and grief and pain with other people. That's scary, especially when you have a history of trauma and you've been rejected and hurt. To then do that again, someone's asking you to do it again, but you get to do it again in safe community and you get different responses and results, and it changes you. And I will also say, you don't always get the responses that you want or need, and that's part of the journey too. There's no guarantee that you get to join community or look for community and they're always going to respond well, or that they're going to be ready for you, or that you're not going to trigger something in their story. That is a part of reality. I have tried to start communities multiple times. I have reached out to individuals that I've shared a lot with that have not reciprocated or kind of shut me out afterwards. Also realizing that doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you, or that you're too much, or that there's no hope for you. Realizing that we're all wounded and that we all are going to still hurt one another. But we can find imperfect, safe communities where we get to practice rupture and repair, not just rupture, which is where our trauma started. So yes, I think community is vital, and I think sharing our stories is vital, and I think it absolutely helps with the healing journey.
As we look back over our stories, what part does forgiveness play, and especially forgiveness for those who are no longer around to have that conversation with, and yet we're called to forgiveness? How do we go about that?
Yeah, that's a big one. So I've had a lot of people ask, my mom has passed away, my dad has passed away, there's no way I will ever be able to grant that forgiveness or have that conversation. I think it's really important to name that starting to untangle and work through our stories really is something that we get to do first. And we have to do that on our own, like when I say on our own, with our communities, but on our own without broaching that relationship that caused the trauma first. The reason we go back is not to place blame on anyone. I have a lot of people who are like, well, I don't want to go back and blame my parents or blame my grandparents or blame whoever may have wronged me. Like, I don't want any part of that. And it's really not about blaming as much as it is about telling a more true story. So we can shy away from not wanting to blame and tell ourselves a story that was the narrative we grew up with, that wasn't the true story or wasn't the truer version of the story. The healing journey is learning to tell ourselves that truer version of the story, figuring out what that truer version of the story was, receiving care for ourselves. Ultimately, I think the goal, or a goal, is to find that we can forgive those people that have wounded us. That doesn't always mean you get to go back. Either they're not there, or they're not open to the relationship, or they're not able to receive what you have to offer. We know forgiveness is one-sided. We get to offer that. It's a gift that we get to give, and it's a burden that's relieved on our side when we do that. And sometimes restoration does happen. Sometimes there's redemption in relationships and restitution, but often that isn't the case. But I think a lot of people confuse the fact that there has to be reconciliation with, now I've worked through this properly. And again, that can happen. That can be part of the story, but it doesn't have to be. So for example, again, my dad passed away, as I mentioned, 4 years ago. I never got to a point where I would have been able to share with him while he was alive. And even if he was alive now, I know he wouldn't have had the tools to respond in the way that I would have wanted him to, or to respond in a way that said, I'm so sorry, please forgive me. As much as I longed for that and wanted that, that wasn't a caveat or a requirement for my healing. Like I mentioned earlier too, with my dad's history, I think going back and looking at some of the behavior of your caregivers or people in your early childhood years, you gain a lot more compassion for them once you start extending compassion to yourself. And so once you start going back into your own story with kindness and curiosity and becoming more self-compassionate, you're able to then extend that compassion to others who've hurt you too. It's a complex journey. There's no one right way. There's no way that it'll definitely work out, but it is something that we have a lot of control and power in of ourselves to be able to say, I am going to work through and figure out what the truest story is here.
What part does your faith in Jesus have in all of the work that you're doing in this area?
Yeah, I don't think I could have done what I've done without knowing the Lord, and ultimately He's the one who first forgave me. I was a sinner and very unaware of my sin towards Him. And so I think having a sense of, I'm not blameless here. As I work through my own story, I've also realized how incredibly I've harmed my children. And so I've started the process of going back to my children and asking for forgiveness from them. But I didn't think I could have done any of that or even realized that I needed to do that without knowing that Jesus had done that for me first. Jesus modeled for us what forgiveness looks like. Also knowing that the Lord has always been there for me, even at those times where I felt alone, even in my childhood when I didn't know Him yet. I became a believer in college. That doesn't mean that He wasn't there, right? He was there all along. And so looking back and seeing even through the trauma and the pain, how faithful He was and how kind He was, being able to look back again, you look back on the painful things, but you can also look back on some good things and say, it was only by the grace of God that happened, or that person was there, or that I had that relationship that sustained me when I really needed someone to be there for me. So I think being able to know how faithful and good the Lord is has really been very helpful for me. Has also helped me just to not harbor resentment and unforgiveness in my own heart.
For the person who's listening and feels that there are patterns that they keep repeating and they're unsure why and thinking maybe this is part of the key to unlocking that, what would your words be to them?
First of all, stop criticizing yourself. Stop this shame cycle around this behavior, because we all have those, right? We have a behavior that we do and we hate it. And so we become really harsh with ourselves over it. I did it again. How could I be so stupid? There we go. I'm hopeless. Just starting to listen to your self-talk is really helpful. You'd be amazed at how unkind it is. And we would never speak that way to other people, for the most part. If we start listening to our self-talk, we can really start seeing how harsh we are on ourselves. So I would say start listening to your self-talk. And when you start recognizing the shame and the resentment that you have towards yourself and the contempt that you have for yourself, start noticing that and asking yourself how you can be more kind and compassionate to yourself. And say, where could this possibly have come from? Is there somewhere that could make this make sense? Is there something that could make this make sense in my story? And really just starting to change that posture. And it takes time, right? It's not something that we're going to do by next week. Our neural networks and our pathways, they need repeated behavior to start changing and to start taking the new path more than the old, very worn path in our brains. And so it takes time. So don't be despondent when you're like, well, I tried that and it didn't work. You need to be committed to doing this over and over again, asking yourself the question, what am I saying to myself right now? What's the tone of that voice? How could this make sense? What is a more kind and compassionate response to this? Be curious, where could this have come from? And once you start doing that, it really starts to change your posture towards yourself. It starts to change your posture towards others in your life too. And I really do believe that that's the start. But we cannot get anywhere if we're going to be critical and harsh with ourselves. We need to be kind and compassionate.
Michelle, I have links in the show notes at bleedingdaylight.net so that people can connect with you, find your journal, Untangling Your Story. I just want to say thank you for being open and honest with us today, telling a little bit of your story and the way that you're helping others now. And thank you for spending time with me today on Bleeding Daylight.
Thank you, Rodney. It's been a real pleasure spending time with you and being able to help maybe one person who listens. That would be a great joy for me.
Thank you for listening to Bleeding Daylight. Please help us to shine more light into the darkness by sharing this episode with others. For further details and more episodes, please visit bleedingdaylight.net.